G'day everyone, welcome to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David. I run a mortgage broking business called Atelier Wealth, but that's not why we're here. What we do on each and every episode is we bring in someone that has a very unique skill set when it comes to property investing, whether that's they've been there, done that, whether they're heavily involved in the industry or whether they've got an area of speciality. And today's guest, I'm very, very excited to bring on because he's someone that has years of experience. I'm talking years of insider knowledge into the industry, someone that's at the top of their game when it comes to the property investing management side of the industry as well. And someone that's also putting out books, which I think is fantastic in terms of sharing knowledge and expertise as well. Really excited. Nicola McDougall, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really good to be here.
I appreciate you jumping on early morning from, I'm going to say, bright and sunny Queensland. How you doing up there?
Lovely. It's been so hot, though. It is crazy. Yesterday, it said it was 34 degrees, but actually it felt like 38. And I tell you what, it really did.
Yeah. I mean, you're up Sunshine Coast way, right? So when it's hot, you feel it. I mean, it's almost like tropical Asia sometimes, isn't it, that humidity?
And being originally from New Zealand, even though I've been gone for 30 years next year, it's December, January, not my most favourite parts of the times of the year. I've always struggled, I like winter in Queensland, but, during this time of the year, I find it extraordinarily hot.
Yeah, but having said that, your winter's still like mid-20s and balmy. I was up there in the Sunshine Coast last year for winter. I'm like, don't even get used to this. It's fantastic.
Honestly, like you have, a pair of jeans or like I've got like brown flared cords and they last you about 5 years because you literally wear them for like a couple of months of the year and then you pop them away in your winter wardrobe for like, next August or something.
When you're living your life in boardies and shorts and T-shirts, mate, you've made a right move to a beautiful part of the world. So thank you very much for joining us. And when I had a look at, I guess, your profile and what I've seen you do contribution to the industry, I mean, your background has been involved in the Australian Property Investment Magazine, which I think gives you a unique insight into this industry and space. You run Bricks Mortar, which is your core business and that involvement in the property investment space. Chair of PIPA, which I think is super exciting, which I want to have a chat to you about as well, and then putting out books. So I won't say busy is not the word. I want to say productive and efficient is probably the word for you. So using the word productive, it almost leads me to my 3 Ps. So a bit about yourself personally, professionally, and your own property journey, if you want to share with us a little bit about yourself, Nicola.
Well, personally, if we're thinking about the property space, I started out as a general news journalist and many years ago, but always had a property background. Like I'm originally from New Zealand. My grandfather was did some commercial property developments back a very, 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 very long time ago. My grandfather was a business owner. Then my father was in property investment, also a business owner. Right. And then here I am, many moons later, in property investment and a business owner as well. So I often say sort of learning at the kitchen table was, my background in regards to entrepreneurship, I suppose, Also, so I started as a general news journalist. I actually used to be a political journalist for a while and followed John Howard around the hustings many years ago. And then kind of just sort of transitioned. At the time, I thought it was a little random into property reporting and things. And so how long ago were we talking about? 17 years ago.
Okay, we're not giving away anyone's age here. You walk straight.
Yeah. 17 years ago, I'd been traveling overseas and I came back to Australia and a 7-month maternity leave contract came up for the REOQ as the communications coordinator. And at the time, I was a print journalist, a daily newspaper journalist, and I went, I want to do something different. I kind of had the pip with journalism a little bit at the time. Seemingly, I thought back in those days it was changing too rapidly. No idea how much it was going to change. And so I applied for that job and ended up being at the REOQ for 7.5 years. And from a 7-month maternity leave contract, ended up being the executive director of corporate affairs by the time that I left. And I only left because I got offered the role as the editor of Australian Property Investor magazine. And I was there for a few years. And then my mother was very unwell with Alzheimer's, and I decided to take some time out to help care for her. She's since passed on. And that was 7 years ago. And I thought, well, I'm just going to leave. I'm going to go do some freelance. And then within 2 years, I was so super busy that my dear friend Kieran Clare, who had been a journalist at Australian Property Investor magazine, and since at that point, API had folded, and he was working at the Courier Mail, and he was doing a little bit of freelance on the side for me. And I took him out for a long lunch and said, dude, we should really go into business together. And that's where Bricks Mortar Media was born, and it's our 6th year this year. And going from strength to strength, super busy and stuff. So I guess I'm sort of answering a few questions. I'm answering the personal and professional there, but that's kind of the journey in regards to how I've ended up focusing on property. And Kieran and I, it's a wonderful business marriage, in that I was a journalist who became a specialist in property. He was a former valuer for 20 years, and he became a journalist. So we kind of crossed over in regards to that. I got involved with PIPA in 2014, I think. Ben Kingsley tapped me on the shoulder at a property investment conference and said, you should apply to join the board. And so I did. And we're all volunteers at the board level of PIPA. And then thankfully, I was there for obviously 8 years, and then a year ago was elected the chair. So that's amazing, very busy. And also last year, The Female Investor came out, which I wrote with another good friend of mine, Kate Hill, down in Sydney. And that's gone very, very well. Was named the 2022 Personal Finance and Investment Business Book of the Year in November. And then today, Property Investing for Dummies 3rd Australia edition is actually available for sale. So, I've been a little busy.
Absolutely.
So does that answer your question, or maybe I answered many questions in one monologue?
Yep. Thank you very much. And as a journal, it just rolls off the tongue for you. So thank you very much. Before we kick off, I just want to share one thing, which is our chat is going to be general in nature and not intended to give advice. So if you do need advice, please seek out a professional. But
Definitely.
You've just glazed over that, which is you have a book dropping today, which is the 3rd edition of Property Investing for Dummies, which I think is fantastic. So congratulations. And we're going to get a hold of a couple of books and share that with a few listeners. But take me through. So we're at the 3rd edition, and I'm sure between the 2nd edition and now, there have been plenty of changes that have gone on. And I'm going to say most would require an edit. I'm going to say that almost required rewriting your book.
When Wiley, so Wiley's my publisher, and they asked me, was it about, I don't know when it was. It might have been May last year, maybe. Female Investor had just come out. And they asked me if I was interested in, I was their first choice to write the 3rd edition. Yes. And I was like, obviously, super grateful and great, awesome, yeah. Said yeah, and then I went, I better read it. Anyway, so I didn't realise that the previous edition was nearly 10 years old.
Yeah.
But look, it was a significant, there was a significant rewriting, there was significant editing, there was significant portions that just went, oh my God, that's not even a thing anymore. That needs to come out. But so many changes, some of the key ones in there. When it was first written, it was in the tail end of, I guess, the lingering effects from the GFC.
Yeah. Okay.
So there was a lot of references to the GFC, for example. Yeah. Clearly property prices significantly different. Like we're talking about, this book was written before the property boom in Sydney, in the 2010s period. Yeah. There was talking about those glorious things that used to exist of 105% mortgages.
That blows my mind.
So, and it was there was a lot at the time. And I remember this because obviously I've been in the industry that long. I sometimes call myself a real estate barnacle. But they were talking a lot about self-managed super fund investing because that was the new black at the time. So while that's still a thing and it's suitable for some people if they've got professional advice on it, it was there was a lot of references to it, and you could, because it was such a new thing at that point. So yeah, there was a lot of work involved to bring it up to date and to, and you know what, it was almost like a walk down memory lane.
I can imagine.
Where when I was doing it, because there was a lot of things in there that I'd forgotten were a thing, or geez, how much the sector has evolved.
Yeah,
certainly my sector in regards to PIPA, which PIPA was in existence then, but very grassroots.
Yeah.
Just about the rise of buyers agents, for example, and all these types of things. It was like, as someone who was sat there and wrote it and looked at everything that happened 10 years ago, it just went to show how fluid and how ever changing the sector is, and it was there and literally in black and white. Yeah. So that's out today, which is super exciting. There is actually 2 smaller guides that are going to be released later this year too. So technically last year, this year I'll have 4 books on the shelves.
Unreal. Congratulations. And we'll have a chat in a second about the other books, but I want to go, you've touched on PIPA and your involvement in how PIPA, so property investing has evolved.
Yes.
And as evolution happens, new entrants come into the market, therefore we need to have a bit more regulation or a bit more of a compliance, for example. And I look at buyers agents, probably where broking was, go back maybe 10 years, and low barriers to entry, didn't really have the structure or the framework, for example, around managing, good, great, and then sometimes the bad that come in as well, and putting in some plans to manage that. So take me through, with your role that's gone from the board, so being a member to becoming part of the board to now becoming chair, for example, what's PIPA's role? How does it protect a property investor? And then what's your big focus being at the helm of PIPA as well?
Yeah, because PIPA is about 15 years old now, and originally and still was established because of the low barriers to entry, in regards to property investment advice. Unfortunately, that is still the case. Yeah. Generally speaking, we were established to lobby governments for regulation in the space. Sometimes over the years, it seemed like that we were pretty close to being successful. Haven't been, when you work and I've worked in, industry associations for a number of years now, and one of the hardest parts is you sort of make these connections and things like that. And then next thing the government changes and you're back to square one, and it depends on whether they have any appetite for change. In regards to property, not classed as a financial instrument. And unfortunately, are we ever going to be successful about helping to create regulation in that space? I would like to think so, but so far, nada. We haven't been. So at a board level, and obviously PIPA's gone from strength to strength, compared to where we were all those years ago. We are a significant organisation that has a significant profile. Yes. We can affect change, obviously, probably I made a joke last year because when the Queensland land tax came in, and we obviously knew that it was proposed. And when it was first proposed, end of 2021, I was like, oh man, that's never going to get through. Like, it was just so ridiculous. And I was away in New Zealand actually visiting my dad for the first time since COVID. And my phone just went mental in June last year. Of all these people going, oh my God, they've passed it. And I'm like going, oh, what? So, our dear friends at the REOQ, various other industry associations, we had been lobbying for a long time. And thankfully, every year we have the annual investor sentiment survey. Yeah. And last year was our 8th annual survey, and it always comes out in August. And so we decided, and every year we ask there's a bunch of questions that are the same every year, but then there's a bunch of questions that are specific to what's happening at the moment. Yep. So we asked investors, if they'd sold, where they'd sold, why they sold, if they were thinking of selling, what were the reasons. And I was the first person to see the results of that. And I remember sitting at my dining table going, holy moly, because it showed that 45% of investors had sold at least one property in Queensland in the previous 2 years. and a huge around the nation. A lot of investors had sold, and they had sold in the last 2 years because of rising prices. We get that. But the intention for investors selling in the year ahead was that they were going to be selling more. And clearly, as we know, we're in the middle of, a generational rental crisis. So that was the first time I think that anyone had actually kind of asked investors, what are you doing and why are you doing that? So we worked very hard behind the scenes to get that data ratified from an independent source, then did a significant media campaign around it. And 7 days later, the legislation was shelved. So for me, that was like, I couldn't believe it, man. Like, I couldn't believe it. And I sort of joked to a few people at the time, that's it. I can retire. I can resign from the board now, la, la, la. So unfortunately, though, those pressures on investors, and we're talking about August, last year, those pressures on investors are just ever increasing. So for me, as the chair, actually I was talking to a board member yesterday and he goes, well, how long do you reckon you'll be the chair? And I said, I've probably got a couple more years in me, but who knows? I would like, my goal is to try to help to change the narrative around, and the prevailing narrative around investors in this country. Okay. I despise the whole greedy landlord or landlady narrative. I despise how poorly, we're treated in political circles. I despise the fact that, there's this thing about investors that we all own 6 properties or 20 properties, and we all know that the stats don't lie. And it's, 71% of investors own 1.
Correct.
And total 90%, so 71% own 1, and if you push it up to 90% own 2, and that's the reality. But so for me, I guess if I was thinking about a goal, I would like to affect change in that narrative. I would like governments, this is my lofty goal, to incentivize investors, because at the moment, obviously, investor lending is falling because generally they can't secure finance. And we are in a terrible, the rental market is in a terrible mess for a bunch of reasons, predominantly because investors haven't been transacting at their average level for many years, and a lot of them have deserted the market. So how is that going to change? Well, we need to encourage investors back into the market. So if I could in some way create that, then that would be, maybe I would retire, not retire from work, but resign from the board at that point, if we could just, have some type of incentive and change the narrative around the vital role that investors have in our society. And in supplying the vast majority of rental properties in this country.
Well said. Well said. I think one thing that we often advocate for is being a good investor. Yes. Being a good landlord. Land person, which is if your tenant needs something, see to it. I think it's a privilege, not a right. And I think we've got to do the right thing as an investor community. Go, if the dishwasher's broke, or if something's happening at the house, just fix it. Get on with life. We've all rented at one point in our lives and had a good landlord versus a bad one, and you go, just err on the good side and pay it forward potentially to a renter, because you never know what they're going through as well, given that
exactly, and one can't exist without the other, right? It's a symbiotic relationship. And I also, in regards to the narrative, it really irks me when I see these media stories where they are just talking about the bad, the bad property investors and not the vast majority who are doing the right thing. And especially when we think about those statistics that, the vast majority own 1 or 2 properties, just so that they can have a better financial life and not rely on the pension in retirement. And seemingly in this country, that's a bad thing, that you're not going to be relying on the public purse in retirement. I think that's fantastic, but no one sort of seems to. But and I always advocate for that. And certainly, with the books, certainly with the female investor, it's about being, the best property investor that you can be, including being fair and reasonable to your tenants.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Just one thing before we move on to the female investor book that you've put out, QPIA. I went through, I think, what was one of my COVID projects, for example, to finish my qualifications, and
very good.
Having gone through that, that's a rigorous program in terms of the detail that you go through. So if you don't understand, qualified property investment advisor is the outcome. So I am qualified to give property investment advice. And then I feel like that was a really good benchmark. It was quite a detailed course, for example. So take me through, how does an investor then find someone who's QPA qualified in that regard?
Yeah, so the QPIA obviously was developed years ago because of the low barriers to entry and the fact that there is not a lot of training for anyone who available, and even under the law, if you want to work as a property investment advisor, you can pretty much put your sign up outside and go, show me the money, so we developed the QPIA and we just updated it last year so that people who wanted to make sure that they were giving, proper property investment advice knew what they were talking about. Because look, let's be honest, there's a number of industries, and we're not just talking about buyer's agent, mortgage broking in your space, accounting, even conveyancing, where just organically, because of the clients that you have sitting across from you, you end up, the client might ask you things about property investment, and we knew that people were giving their opinion, but it wasn't advice because they didn't necessarily know what they were talking about. So we were always like, well, if that's happening, let's train them. Let's create this program so that when they are asked those questions, they actually know what they're talking about. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's, and the QPIA is going from strength to strength. We've got, let me think. Might be about 800 people that have, gone through the program now, which is significant. And with PIPA and the QPIA, because of the lack of regulation in the space, we're talking about people like you, and many people like you, who are the good guys and girls of the industry, who are voluntarily deciding to, lift their game, become a member of the association, which is not a tick and flick approach, and it requires, higher standards of business practice, various disclosures, things like that. And also who are actually volunteering to do additional training so that they can actually make sure that the advice that they're giving is sound and valid. So, we always say preferably work with a PIPA member and preferably work with someone that is QPIA. Obviously, they would have the branding associated with that, but certainly on the PIPA website, people can search for PIPA members and QPIAs as well. And my goal, apart from the incentivization of investors, is that every single person who is looking, always have these lofty goals, every single person who's looking for property investment advice in this country, if they sit down with someone, they ask them, are you a PIPA member? Are you a QPIA? And if they're not, they walk away. Like, how great would that be? And then we have true self-regulation, because at the moment there is no regulation. So if we have to be that body that is, regulating the sector, then that would be an extraordinary outcome and just wonderful consumer protection as well.
Isn't it? Yeah, well said. I said that we have a chat about your book, which you put out, which is The Female Investor. And I'm a little bit intrigued because female investor numbers are on the up. And it's interesting when you look at who are the female investor participation rates, so younger investors that are coming into the market, but also older investors. And we're talking maybe females that are aged over 55. And it's an interesting one because I feel like it's a life cycle reflection. So I look at younger females, highly qualified, for example, good incomes that are coming in, probably seeing their parents and what's happened to their situation, trying to learn and trying to take control back on their financial independence. Then you probably go into that middle stage in life, which is maybe family, children, or career. And then you come later in life, which is that moment where you go, I need to plan for retirement. And what's the way to get there? Because if you look at probably females that are over 55, they probably have the super balances to get them to retirement comfortably as well. So take me through, you've probably done a lot of research in this space as well. So take me through what your research has entailed, where the book is hitting a spot, and what some of those insights have been as well, please, Nicola.
Yeah, I actually wrote the outline for the book in 2018 and pitched it to Wiley, and they were keen, and then I sort of abandoned it. I think it was the same time as we were setting up Bricks Mortar Media. Yeah. And I mentioned it to Kate a couple of years ago, Kate Hill, my co-author and a good friend of mine, and she's a QPIA in Sydney. And she said, oh, love, you really need to do this book. And I said, oh, man, I'm so busy, blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, shall we do it together? And I went, that is a great idea, because we truly, both of us, truly believe in helping to inspire women to create some financial independence and to improve their financial outcomes during their lives, but also in retirement.
Yeah, nice.
So I reworked the proposal, pitched it into Wiley, and we jumped all over it. And we actually had the book done in about 4 months.
Nice one.
Which is crazy. So it went from, I think, approval to on the in April. I think it was in June 2021. On the shelves late March 2022. So it was pretty quick. And obviously, though, I'm a professional, I'm a writer. I have a master's in creative writing, all these things. And the hardest part about writing the book, honestly, was working out what to leave in and what to take out, because each chapter could have been its own book. It's very hard to write, to write concisely. Like, everyone can sit down and, bang away and have, 5,000 words of dribble. But when you've got like 2,000 words to talk about property management, for example, that is tricky. So that is the genesis of it. And both of us, and it was weird actually that, there wasn't really a book out there already in that. And also very disconcerting that when we came up with the title, I went to look at URLs and the femaileinvestor.com.au was available still in 2021.
Okay.
And I'm like going,
I think that's probably 99% of the battles when you got a creative idea. It's the actual URL. It changes the entire creative process.
Yeah, exactly. So, look, the stats don't lie, unfortunately. The financial outcomes for women throughout their lives continue to be inferior to men. We have significantly lower super balances. If you separate or divorce, the financial outcomes for women later in life are far inferior. All of these things. And that's for a bunch of reasons, which we don't have time to go into now. But if you read the book, you'll learn about it a bit more.
We've got to get our hands on that.
Yeah, but I think it's both of us, Kate and I, both want to inspire a younger. Well, obviously, the book is for a woman of any age, right? So there's that. No matter where you are in the life cycle, whether you're single, you're married, you're divorced, whatever, widowed, there is information in there for you. However, what we would really like would be to inspire younger women in their 20s, in their 30s, before they have partnered, to forge their own financial path. And that could be, and our suggestion in a low risk way is to purchase, even if it's just one property, like one property that they retain independently of any whatever happens in the future, because that even one property can really make a big difference to their financial outcome at the leading up into retirement, but also it gives them an opportunity. Say, for example, they do partner up and they separate, which, let's be honest, 40 to 50% of people still do. It gives them the somewhere even to go, or a bit of financial independence, so we're not ending up in family court for years on end because the only thing that you have is things that you have together. Yeah,
well said. Well said. And the female mindset as well, from your research, did that change from a male mindset when it came to investing? Do females need more, I'm going to say, a little bit more guidance because they maybe haven't had the example or role model, or they don't know who to trust? Does that come into play as well from part of your research?
I think there has been a big difference between the genders in our lives when it comes to financial understanding, and even just, women, I guess, in generations gone by. It's probably not for me. I'm in a Generation X, and so is Kate. I was treated equally in my family. I had that benefit of learning at the kitchen table, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But prior to that, there is a difference, I think, in the genders in regards to, talking about the stuff or even, showing interest in it. And the big difference these days, compared to 10 years ago, so when Property Investing for Dummies, the second edition came out, is that there are a huge cohort of qualified professionals like yourself who can help people that are available out there that probably there wasn't in times gone by. And that's why we are seeing such an uptick in people who are prepared to, work with bona fide experts such as yourself, and, whether they work with buyers agents and things like that to actually, pay for independent advice, tailored advice for them. That is going to make all the difference. And I think we are going to see a continuing rise in the number of female investors because they have access to these people who weren't really there before. Like I think about, when I started the REIQ 2006, there was maybe a handful of buyers agents,
Yeah.
Now clearly it's different. So in the last, 16, 17 years, that has changed for the better, and that will be, better for women who can tap into that resource. But I always say to anybody, look, like I said before, if you're looking to work with somebody and you're going to be investing, 800,000 or whatever it is, depending on where you're buying, make sure that the person is qualified, licensed, knows what they're talking about, runs on the board, all of these things, because it's too risky to hand your money over to someone who doesn't actually know what they're doing.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Imagine spending $800,000 on a car unseen, for example. You do your research on it. I'm like, that's what a lot of our investors. I'm like, now you know every inch of detail and specs on a car, but you're happy to buy a property that you've never seen and have very little understanding of the neighborhood or the metrics, and you're happy to drop over $500,000. Let's just have a think about this as well. But I'm glad we're on the same page. So I want to say thank you very much because you're taking time out on a very, very important and busy day. So I want to wish you every success with your book. Touch wood, it goes well. Anytime you've got a great publication, it hits the spot. That's a labor of love that you can be proud of as well. So I want to say congrats on all your books, but particularly the one that's dropping today. And if you are interested in a copy or you want to find out more, please reach out to our team here at Atelier Wealth and we'll try to get our hands on a copy for you as well. But Nicola, I want to say thank you very much. We'll include links to your books, also to PIPA as well, which I think is super, super important to raise awareness around what PIPA is, what you stand for, and also who it represents. And I'm sure we'll be chatting at some point in the future, talking about possibly your next book as well. I'm very interested to see what the next publication is. I don't want to rain on your party just yet, but you're probably on to the next thing, I'm sure.
I've given myself a commitment that I'm not writing any more books this year. But then the other day I caught myself going, well,
we're 1 month into this year. I'm sure that'll change as time goes on. But I want to say thank you so much for your time and your energy as well. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Aaron. It's been extraordinary to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Fantastic. If you found this episode helpful, please leave us a review. But even better, if you have questions that you maybe have for Nicola or myself, please reach out to us as well. We'd love to help you. That's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron. Until next time, take care.